Now we can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I apologize for my lighting not being great, but the time of day, so I'm really not as shadowy figure as I may look. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video in just a second. I'm excited to be here with you all. I love seeing some familiar faces and names and some new faces and names. Um, Design thinking is something I'm really, really passionate about. So I'm really excited that you guys have chosen to join us and that we can give you an introduction. If you're new to that, if you're returning, feel free to share in the chat. I became exposed to design thinking about a year ago. I had been a STEM chemistry teacher for 15 years at Salisbury High. Then I went to be a technology facilitator at a middle school for 3 years, which I loved, but I got the opportunity to go to North Rowan High and help with their redesign of their curriculum and the design thinking with our students. Our students historically at that school had been not achieving at a high level. And so, in a way to combat and try to change the school, we implemented design for our 9th and 10th graders. And it was an amazing opportunity. And so, with that, I want to share with you some of the things that we are doing. Um, can you guys see the presentation okay? Um, I know I'm
Yes.
having a little bit of trouble here with my setup. Um, so, okay, so you guys can see the PowerPoint okay? Or the slide deck?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. It's just kind of weird on this side. Okay,
Yes.
so first of all, a big thank you to the Friday Institute for doing this conference. You guys are going to get a lot out of it. And so at the end of this session, I had to adapt it from being a face-to-face to virtual, which does give some interesting opportunities for me to design for you guys as well. We want to make sure that you guys understand what design thinking is, and that where I find the value of this after doing it for a year and a half is that it helps improve equity and access for all our students. I will share with you some stories of where our students in the past had been maybe not as high achieving and maybe were just really discouraged and literally on the verge of dropping out. I worked with 10th graders, and with this design, we were able to reinvigorate them. I have a son who at the time was 7 and loves going to school every day. And it was exciting to go and see 10th graders excited about coming to school every day. If you've worked with 10th graders before, you know, sometimes their excitement about school can be harder to find. So that's what I love about design thinking. It helps to get students reconnected. And we had a lot of students. Yeah, I'm seeing some of the good comments. Sharing is caring, definitely. Seen some of our students who historically would have said, you know, I'm struggling to get D's or C's. And those students were then saying, for the first time in a long time, I'm as smart as, you know, the A kid in the corner. And, you know, we talked about that and tried to, you know, talk to them about what smartness really is. So, if you're not familiar with design thinking, David Lee has done, and I have a link to some of his activities later on in his book. It's a process in which we solve problems. If you think about what we want our students to do, we want our students, when they graduate, or at least I do, to be able to go forward and solve problems. And hopefully, those are problems that will impact us. I used to tell the students, you know, I'm getting older and, you know, at some point I'm going to be really, really old. And I want to make sure that they're in good shape to take care of me, because if they're not, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So David captures this definition in a really good way that I like, that we want our students to be designers, to solve problems and be agents of change. And if our students can do that upon graduation, we have definitely helped them to move forward, in my opinion. I think that's so important. If you guys could, I would like for you to go watch this video. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. This is a video from our local station about a student who's one of our um, local high schools. And I'd like for you to go ahead and take about 2 minutes to go in and watch the video and pay attention to what you see about problem solving from this particular student. So if you'll go ahead and do that, and the link should be in the chat. Okay, and if you haven't quite finished watching the video, that's okay, because I think you've got the gist of it. In the video, Leah, I had the opportunity to work with Leah in a middle school STEM camp, and she's really sharp, very smart. And she was going to college, to Wake Forest University, to be a medical student. That ultimately was her trajectory at the time. And her mother works with my wife. My wife works part-time in the summer, as a lot of educators do. And my wife had mentioned that her mother was going through breast cancer. And Leah's always been real sharp and real on top of things. And when I saw this segment after Leah had graduated from high school here in Rowan, Salisbury, I was really impressed, because it really captures what I think we want our students to do, with being agents of change and creative problem solvers. And so she was looking at her mother's experience. Yeah. And, she realized that this was not a comfortable situation. It's kind of insult to injury with her mother dealing with the cancer, but then with trying to be comfortable. And she figured out a way to work with the doctor, and to go in and ultimately patent, or begin to patent this new bra that would be much more comfortable. And so it's amazing. Now she switched her major, and she's moving into the business marketing area. But all that came from this crucial idea of what we call empathy, which is the keystone of design thinking. With empathy, we have to really work with our students on understanding that, because I think so often in our society, and in my experience with students today, they don't take enough time to get to understand others. And so that's what I think about the beauty of the design thinking process, is we can go through and have our students work to solve problems that are going to impact others and improve the quality of life. And what I love, and this is why I love the equity and access, is any student can be a designer. We have students in our district taking design thinking in the elementary school, in the middle school, and in the high school, and they all can be designers at a level that's appropriate for them. And so it's great. And even better is, sometimes maybe they don't have the skills that other classmates have, and that's okay, because being a designer, they bring their own experiences. And so there's this one story Tim Brown tells in his book, um, Creative Thinking. Sorry, that's not the name of it. It slipped my mind, but it's at the end of the slideshow. And Doug Dietz had designed an MRI machine. He was so proud of it. It was going to be this cutting edge, super design experience. And he went through and he flew up for the first patient for this new machine. And lo and behold, the first patient that Doug got to observe was a small kid having to go for an MRI. And here Doug is thinking, this is going to be an awesome experience. I've designed this. And the kid is like scared to death. If you can imagine, if you've ever had an MRI, they're loud. You go into this machine, and he realized, this is crazy. This is not working for my kid and stuff. So he went back and redesigned his whole experience. And in doing so, he took the machine he had built and designed it into a way that would benefit kids. One is designed as a pirate ship. And so, can you guys imagine if you go in as a small kid, getting this MRI, and now you're in a pirate ship, or maybe you're going into like a princess style castle? So, he realized through design thinking of how to go through and improve that experience for all of the students. So hopefully this is something we can begin to popularize with it. We should be on a slide that says history and application of DT, design thinking. And I'm talking about Doug Dietz, who's on the last sentence at the end. So David Lee goes on to talk about this really long definition, and you guys will get a link at the end. But I love this attempt. He says it's about having the courage and attempting to bring meaningful change to people's lives. If we can do that with our students, it's a win-win. If we can help our students be courageous and understand how to solve problems that benefit others, we have definitely reached a key point of what I think we should be doing in education. If you were with Liz in the keynote, then you probably realized she talked some about Dewey and his strong sense of constructivism and that learning is social. The design thinking process was right in line with a lot of what she was saying. And if you look here, here's a graphic I've created. And in this graphic, design thinking is a process, but it's not a linear process. It's a process in which you can go through the different processes or stages, and you can go forward or come back. The first step is empathy. If you guys could put in the chat what you think is a good definition of empathy for us, so go ahead and put in the chat what you think would be a good definition of empathy. It is a recursive process in a way. We're going to talk about how it, moves forward, it moves back, but yeah. So good. Concerns for others, understanding someone else's fill-ins. Good. I love a lot of what you guys are saying. And even though these are not necessarily standards in anyone's curriculum, I think we all can agree that it's something that we'd want our students to be able to do, to understand others, to relate. And so with design thinking, we spend a lot of time in the beginning in this empathy stage. And in that empathy stage, we have to help our students, even 10th graders, understand what does it mean to really be empathetic. In the schools that are doing them in our system, in the elementary schools, in a lot of ways, they, can attach to empathy a lot easier than I think some of our older students, because they're still in an empathetic kind of frame of mind. And so we spend a lot of time on empathy, helping our students understand that. And so what is it like to be someone else? One of the ways we do that is through interviewing, right? If you've met someone, getting to know them. Another way we have our students experience empathy is through reading stories. Stories are a great way to build empathy. And so if you're an ELA or social studies teacher, oftentimes when you're reading those texts, those are great ways to connect to design thinking. And I'll share some of those later on. So as we get through the empathy stage, and again, we spend a lot of time with the empathy part of this process, we then help our students identify or define a problem. As a chemist, that's what I'm trained as. We often begin with the problem and try to figure out the solution. But design thinking is different, that we begin by understanding what is it like to be someone else? What is that process like to be them? And then we identify or define the problem. It's interesting to try to help our students shift from immediately identifying the problem to taking the time to get to understand that person. Last year, our students had an opportunity to work with a staff member in air school or middle school, and they had to identify for that staff member a potential problem. But to do that, they had to go and observe that person. They had to go interview that person. They used what they knew of that person previous. And one of the groups worked with a guidance counselor. And it was interesting because she's like, I really don't have any needs or things that I need to be solved. And so she wasn't necessarily one of the easiest ones for the students to figure out what they were going to try to solve for her. But in the end, they did. They figured out that she needed some stronger organizational strategies. And so it challenged those students to really understand and observe that person in a way that maybe that person wasn't even cognizant of. And so it was awesome there. So we'll go from empathy and we'll define the problem. Now, lots of times our students came back and they would try to define the problem. And as they were moving through the process, they understood or they realized I misidentified the problem. So they may go back to empathy and do some more observations or come back and identify and define a problem to be solved. And so this is not strictly linear. You do not go 1, 2, 3. You start with empathy, but you can always cycle back. And so it's very fluid in a way. And then we get to number 3, ideate. Ideate is a new word for our kids. It was a new word for me when I discovered this process. With ideate, we want our kids to come up with ways to solve the problem. And we call it very courageous brainstorming. What are some ways to solve that problem? And this is where we get to see our kids be extremely creative. Something that by the time they've got to high school, they haven't often thought much about because we're herding them into one direction, into a very divergent way of being. Here, we get very convergent. I'm sorry, I switched those. We put our students into a convergent way of thinking, trying to get them all to the same point. But then with ideate, we're able to take that and get them going in different directions to solve a problem. And this is where you can encourage the kids to be bold and to be, perhaps outrageous. We ask them just to spend any type of judgment on those brainstorming ideas while they generate them. And then later on, they can come back and phase out, is this feasible? Is this not? They can work through that process. Then they can go into prototype where they would create a solution. Lots of times this involves physically building something or creating something. One of our student groups were working with a resource officer, and the need they had identified was he needed some physical activity if he was stuck at his desk for a long period of time. He wasn't at his desk a lot, but occasionally when filling out paperwork. So they went in and used Metaverse as an app and created this whole workout routine of desk exercises he could do. And so they created that as their prototype. They went and shared it with him and got some feedback. And in doing so, they figured out that a resource officer really liked the art of war. So they went in and modified, and they gave quotes from the book throughout the app just to kind of help motivate him. So it was a very personalized experience. And all that was done through understanding what it was for a resource officer when he, what needs he had, what it was like when he was stuck at his desk for a long period of time and couldn't get up. And so they developed workout activities. They even gave him some feedback if he completed the activities. So it's pretty awesome to kind of see that. And so that's the design thinking process. Are there any questions about it before we progress on? And I'll wait for just a minute or two. Yeah, I think so, Carol. We can all identify being stuck at our desk for a long period of time. But imagine, if they connected it to like your favorite set of quotes with your favorite music. I mean, it'd be totally personalized for him. Yeah, and he, was still contacting me earlier this year. He got reassigned to a different duty, but he was like, "Can you send me that link again?" Um, DT and PBL have a lot of similarities, um, but they are not necessarily exactly the same. There's a lot of overlap. With problem-based learning, you begin with the problem typically specified. Um, with that, you might look at something like, we have this drain in town that repeatedly gets stopped up and it floods this part of the street. And then people would extend out from there, finding different solutions. Um, Whereas with design thinking, you do not start off with a problem, and each group actually comes up with different problems. And so the starting points are very different. Once in design thinking that problem has been identified, then it can look very similar to a PBL after that, if that helps. Um, I would say we actually used it more as challenge-based learning, which I would say is kind of a distant cousin of problem-based learning, where the kids or students come up with the problem they're going to solve. And I would say that's the biggest, difference. But once the problem has been identified, then from there on out, it's very similar whether we're doing design thinking, challenge-based learning, or PBL. Prototypes, and that's a good question because we have to work with our students, and oftentimes prototype and test get together. But a prototype is essentially where you take a solution and you try it out. And with that, it may or may not work. Think of, for example, if you're doing as a science teacher, I would have my kids build Rube Goldberg machines, and they might roll a marble to turn over a domino, which in turn would turn over other dominoes, and then maybe cause something to fall down and a cup move this way and that way. And so with a prototype, they would take it and test it out. And so it's a possible solution, but it's oftentimes not the final solution because they'll get feedback or they'll go into what we call the reiteration. And if you look at our graphic down here, we'll go ideate to prototype to test, and those are circular. And so if I come up with a prototype, I'm going to test it, and then I may need to change it. Often the first prototype is not the final solution to the problem. So hopefully that will help you with that. So good questions. Normally I would do a design simulation with you, but because of our time and such, so what I want to do is focus on how we can use this process to go into that learning is social with our 4Cs and also student agency. Design thinking, the design school at Stanford has a lot of good activities, and you guys will get a link to this presentation at the end that you can use. And they have a lot of good resources you can pull. There's one that's called a gift giving activity that I do quite a bit. I did it just last week with the youth group I work with at my church. So we're doing design thinking everywhere here. And it was really great because it helped our students to understand empathy, and that was kind of our focus based on those connections. So I want to talk about some of the results, and then I'll pull up some examples. What we found with our group is in this school, kind of those high achieving students, that top 10 to 20%, they were the group that most challenged us with using design thinking, the process. They oftentimes would ask me, can you just tell me what the answer is to this? Or can you just give me a test on it? They did not like the open-ended approach because they were so used to being told what to do, and they would take it, process it, and give it back to us in the way that they received it. The other students were the ones who really tend to enjoy the process once they got comfortable with it. They felt re-engaged, reconnected to school. You know, for once in a long time, what they brought from home, their experiences were something they could use. They had access to use those home and life experiences in a way that would benefit them and be acknowledged and even rewarded in school. Um, we had one student, I am not an entrepreneurial, and one of our kids, for one of their many challenges, wanted to raise money for a homeless shelter. So I thought, okay, great. They wanted to sell candy, you know, and so we worked through that process. But when they were trying to figure out what to charge for the candy, they had no idea. They were pretty clueless, and I wasn't. Yeah, I was clueless myself when they asked me. But we had a student from another group step in, and she told them what to charge. It was amazing to see her come out of her group and come over and say, okay, you need to sell this and this and this. And she knew her audience of who she was going to sell candy to. She had done this before, and she told them how to price it. And she told them, go to the Dollar Tree, buy this and this and this. I know it was collaboration. Yeah, it was amazing. And so she went and, you know, she organized it all for them and told them how to sell it. And it was amazing to see that emerge. And, you know, I asked her, I said, how did you know to do this? She's like, well, I do it, but, you know, it's nice to kind of have that part rewarded because it's never really acknowledged in school. And so lots of times other people will bring their experiences. Students learn they can be creative. And I really want to specify here, creative is different in a way that I call creative thinking. Um, we think sometimes creative, when our students hear that, they think that it's like cute and adorable, but really we want to stress the process of creative thinking here with them. We also were able to help them build resiliency, and to use the resiliency our kids had developed over time. I know some of you in here at the previous high school I used to teach at, and the high school where I did this, we have a lot of students that come from very challenging circumstances. And if they know anything, they know how to survive. They may not be able to do some of the other things that the curriculum asks them to do, but they're very good at being resilient. And so we were able to take that and fold that into their experience in a way where we acknowledge that at school. And our kids really loved it. Even to this day, they're like, I loved your class because I got to use what I brought from my home experience. Um, we were able to challenge our students at levels where they were, and we helped them to grow. Not all our kids are at the same level, but we were able to figure out where they were and to do that in a way to help them grow all through this process of design thinking. And then perhaps the most awesome thing is we're giving them what they need to practice and expand skills for the future. I mean, if anything that our schools, and as a high school teacher for over 16 years, that I feel like we need to do a better job is preparing our schools for a future, our students for a future in which they're going to have many challenges that we will have no idea about. And so that's what I love about implementing this into the classroom. Um, I have some activities here. And what I'm going to ask you to do when you get this, you can go to any of these three, is I'm going to go ahead and take us and give you this link. Oh, good question about brainstorming. We did lots of different things with brainstorming. If you want to click on the link in the chat. With brainstorming, you have to teach that process many different ways. We had many sets of poster boards and post-its where our students would go in and share that. We also had online tools that they could use, and we let our students explore and figure out which ones they really liked. Um, a lot of this is processes that we have to model. Um, Let me change that permission setting. Processes that we have to model. And in doing so, um, let's see, try that one and see if that works. In doing so, helping our students see different ways to brainstorm, different ways to work together and come up with an idea. Because, our students, I love them to death, but, sometimes they don't get along. I mean, awesome. They're a lot like other people's students. I'm sure that, we have to teach them how to understand different ideals, work with that process, and go through that. And at a time when a lot of what they're seeing in our country is a lot of divisiveness, it's even more challenging. Um, so we did do alphabet brainstorming, which we loved. For those of you who do not know that, it's where you take each of the letters and they come up with an ideal that starts with that letter. So yeah, brain writing. Yeah. So what is going on in your brain, and just write it down and share it. So we went through many different processes for our students, and it's all sound stuff because they were using it in other classes too, which was awesome. If we look at this process, the Google Doc I have up here, this is one that we did with my sixth graders, where they had to design a background screen on their iPad for a friend. And we were teaching them design thinking. So this may be one, if you're wanting to get started, that you're welcome to take and use. And so we were teaching them empathy, and we had to help them because they were sixth graders understand what questions to ask, and we would practice that. How do you actively listen? Again, all things we want our students to be able to do. Going back to flip chart and all that, we had 4 classrooms last year. So our walls were full of brainstorming and different ideals that people had. And then, we had to help our kids manage that process. How do you keep up with it? And so if you had walked in our classroom, it was definitely very active with, ideals flowing and those things. And so you have to figure out which of those processes you can use. Um, if we look some at the chart here, this is one thing you're welcome to take and use, and we've tried to break it down to where you could take it, literally walk into your classroom probably 2 days from now after you look over it, and go through and have your students work on this. We've had some amazing stuff come out of our students who were working with this, and it's been interesting because sometimes it's like an emotional release because people are so excited someone took the time to listen to them and develop something very personal for them. So that's pretty awesome. If we go back, the 7th grade one, that is one that we did with our 7th grade that I'm working with this year. And we took a character and a story, and we did a design thinking activity. They had read the entire book. And so what a better way than to be able to know the story of that character. You've read the whole book, you know what happens to him. He had lots of challenges. And so they identified a problem in there that they wanted to solve. One that I also put on here is where you could work with teachers if you're doing a PD, and they would design an ideal school. I think we as teachers have lots of good ideas about how we should redesign an ideal school. If you ever had an opportunity to help build one, I would say that'd be an awesome time. But that could be a good way to teach this process to your faculty and staff as well. I know we're running a little short on time. So at the end, I want to give you some resources, and then I'll take some questions. I have links to different books. I'm not necessarily endorsing I mean, I am supporting these books, but I'm not telling you have to buy them. But I gave you the link to them on Amazon. I also have my Wakelet resources, which I add to as I find articles, other interesting things. Um, Another good book is Lifelong Kindergarten. As a high school teacher, it spoke immensely to me. Educated by Design is my number one book. Michael Cohen, he does some amazing work, and he's known as the Jewish rabbi on the tech rabbi on Twitter, but really big on creative thinking and those things in with our helping to improve our schools for our students. Um, some other things I've mentioned: the challenge-based learning by Digital Promise. If you're in the keynote, there was a reference Digital Promise for evaluating ed tech tools. Creative Confidence is the book I meant to speak of earlier. Recently, Jen Williams has put out the Teach Boldly is how can we take and connect with the millennials sustainability goals. And she is phenomenal, really strong on empathy. She's doing work through the United Nations. Right now I'm reading Lindsay Portnoy's Design to Learn. What I've read so far, it's really right on with what I think we need to be doing. Another good activity is the Twitter chat, DTK12 chat, Wednesday nights at 9. It's an international chat. It usually has, and some of you in here are from that chat, a lot of Canadians and Americans and people from across the world. Always a great, great hour, and you'll leave very filled with new ideas and lots of support. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead, and stop my screen sharing, and then shift back over to Laura. And if you have questions, I'll go ahead and be happy to take them.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much, Brian. It's always such a treat to hear Brian talk. I've been in at least one, probably more than that, sessions with Brian now. So my favorite part was I wrote down students as designers and agents of change. So I love that line. But there were a couple questions. I think you got most of them already, but feel free, folks. We have about 10 minutes. So shoot your questions in the chat. But one thing maybe you could touch on, Brian, is how you would approach design thinking with younger students.
I think that's a good question, and I see some of those coming up. I think with younger students, you look at what is relevant to them. The elementary schools that are doing them have taken their special courses and implemented design thinking in there, and so they're combining design thinking like with their music, with their art, with their PE. And so the focus there is a lot on teaching the empathy piece and making sure students really understand empathy and can experience it. And so one of the examples that we have worked with is as students are getting ready like for the holidays, is there a need where they could create some art to be displayed somewhere, whether it's, it was for the holiday in this example, but maybe at our local, we have a Veterans Administration or a VA hospital here or at our local hospital to help bring some otherwise, to help perk up some otherwise still hospital environment, for lack of a better term. So helping our students identify needs. Some of our students have organized things like drives, whether they're book drives, canned food drives, to help meet needs in their community. And so a lot of it really just depends on looking at what you have. And I think that's the beauty, because you get to connect with our community. Where we live, we have the North Carolina Transportation Museum. And so our students routinely are connecting with them to help meet their needs. This year, they're working to redesign some of the exhibits, which are in need of being more updated. And so the kids are bringing that in. How can they bring in some technology use as well with the tools they have? And it's also helping the museum, because they're like state agency, so their budget is very limited. So they're essentially getting all this great help for free, but our students are doing something that's making a difference in their community. And so I think even with their elementary school, looking at what needs are there and how can our kids help. A lot of us, can reach out to houses of worship, community organizations, homeless shelters. We took our kids to the homeless shelter and they designed lots of different programs. One group was designing a program to help people that when they were there in the transition, to get them ready to go out and interview. And I'm seeing some other good ideas pop up in the chat as well. So as you look at them, I would say, integrate those in. For some of you, we had a whole course on design thinking. So it's kind of this great ideal because I didn't have to implement it in with a science class or a reading class. But there's ways that you can take that if you're willing to kind of think about it. It really is cross-curricular learning. It can integrate very well with our social studies and ELA standards, even your science standards, to a degree your math standards. So can you work in a team in elementary school? They do a lot of cross-curricular learning. And so you can integrate in those lessons on citizenship and also, on how you would design like a clear message if you're in the writing part of the Common Core standards, for lack of a better term, to convey something you want to convince someone to do for a project. So hopefully that's giving you guys some good ideas. A lot of it is trial and error. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. Our kids make mistakes. And you've got to let them understand that. Our kids, a lot of them, in my experience, have this high perfectionistic tendency. And when they make a mistake, they almost stop. And I'm like, it's okay. We know as adults, gosh, if we stopped every time we had a mistake, I mean, we'd be paralyzed for days, but helping our kids see that we make mistakes and that's okay. This is how we learn from them and go on. So those are some of the beauty of design thinking. If I had more time, I'd run you through a simulation so you could experience it. And you're always welcome to touch base with me if you need to.
Yeah, the chat is full of some good ideas. Thank you everybody for sharing. And I think also just design thinking naturally kind of teaches those soft skills and some of those things that we wouldn't necessarily be thinking about, but it's like you said, the citizenship, the getting them ready to approach the community members and things like that, are those skills that we're trying to prepare students for outside of our classroom.
Oh, definitely.
One,
Looking at
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I love the ideal that Delane gave about designing a school playground that's handicap accessible. Imagine if our students, have, that classmate or two that has that challenge and they design it and then they went to the Board of Education or to the principal to share, you know, to let them see that their work matters. Imagine, third or fourth graders going up there and saying, this is what we think needs to happen at our school because our kids can't access some of the playground equipment. I mean, that would be awesome. So
we are wrapping up here. I have one more item to mention or ask you about. So since the empathy piece is so critical in the design thinking process, how do we set up our classroom? How do we create that culture of empathy and getting kids prepared for a process like this? I know you don't have a lot of time. That's a big question.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's something we've got to do. First of all, you've got to live and breathe empathy yourself. I mean, I had to go back and retrain myself from being this cold and heartless chemistry teacher, so to say, and being much more feeling, and I have a high empathy quotient, but, going back and modeling that. And so maybe, you got to start there, but also you've got to live and breathe it every day because kids are going to see if it's not that this is what I'm about. And it's so important. I want you to learn this. And so we also had the support of our administration. I mean, it was her ideal. So she was coming around supporting us. We were supporting our students. So it was a change and shift in the school culture too. I don't think we could have achieved it if we had not had that administrative support. So you've also got to get your principal on board, even if you're going to be that lone person doing it. Go and share and let them know what's important. If you need some talking points, reach out to me. I am more than willing to, share examples and share the good news and why I think it's so much needed. It's what I want my son to have. And I look at it that way. It's what I want my son to have. And if we can give that to all our kids, then we're definitely doing what's right.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much. And having personally met Brian, I know you definitely practice what you preach.
Thank you.
And so as we wrap up here, Brian has shared the link to his presentation it's noted in the conference schedule. So if you go back there, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here just for the last minute or so as we wrap up. I just wanted to remind you of the session evaluation. That's also located on the conference schedule. So I know Brian would love your feedback. And then we do have another session coming up at 5 o'clock Eastern. So you have a couple minutes here to take a little break, get yourself situated, choose your session. And then, of course, stay connected with us. We, like I said in the beginning, are K-12 support, both in North Carolina, but also across the U.S. So we love to stay connected with folks that way. So we have a newsletter that goes out monthly. We're also pretty active on Twitter. I know Brian is active on Twitter as well. So between the resources that he has shared, the links, his contact information, I hope that we can stay connected. And I will keep the chat open here, and if Brian has a couple moments to stay on. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some awesome ideas. The interactive gallery using Padlet or Poplet, we'd have students go around and give feedback to other groups. So, I mean, amazing things, what all they could do. My Twitter is pretty easy. It's just Scibri, SCIBRI. So Scibri. So feel free to follow me. I'll follow you back. And lots of great things. But yeah, I would definitely love to continue to learn with you all. And if you're doing things, let me know. We love it. That DT K-12 chat on Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock. Awesome. Join us. Awesome people. I mean, people I feel like I know well that I've never met, but we support each other. So DT K-12 chat, it's Wednesdays at 9 p.m. It's like an amazing group of people. It's the people you want to work with in your school, if you could choose. Yeah, they're awesome. So that's, if you're not familiar with Twitter, it's just a hashtag, and if you go into Twitter and just do that. So Wednesdays at 9, so please join. And you can always search the archives and see the good things they're doing. So yeah, so good stuff, everyone. Yeah. So try design thinking today. Go out on the street and pull people.
Yes.
All right, and enjoy the rest of your conference. You have some great things lined up. So thank you guys for doing this. I love some of the speakers. I have some good friends who are doing some future ones, so be sure to check them out. And take and share. Take what you're learning, share with someone tomorrow at your site or school, and help lift them up and move forward too. So I'm scrolling through the chat. Yeah, some of my first graders show the whole class without knowing they're empathetic. Yeah, sometimes we don't even recognize it. And we as teachers need to call that out and recognize that empathy when we see it, even among our colleagues. So, let them know and reinforce that, because sometimes that's not reinforced in our world. So, with our students especially, I love to see that empathy and those expressions of true humanity. So right. I think we're probably good, everybody. So
All right.
thanks for coming. And if you need
Yes.
anything, you can also email me. If some of the settings are not set up on the documents correctly, just request access. I know one or two of you had on one of the earlier ones. So you can email me at school or home, or um, Twitter, or if you have carrier pigeons, you can send that as well. So,
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. I will go ahead and end the meeting.
all right, thanks.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everybody.
Bye.